All right, folks, let's get started. I wanted to talk a little bit today about S 2135, which is a gun bill by Senator Cornyn and Senator Murray and Senator Blumenthal and a number of others. The way this appears to be shaping up, I think I might be the only no vote, and I wanted to explain why I was going to vote no. The bottom line is this, and then I'll try to explain myself. I don't believe we need more gun control. I believe we need more idiot control. Now let me explain what I mean by that. As you know, we have a national database. We call it the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. The acronym is NICS, and it's a good law. I support it. It says that if you have committed a felony, if you are mentally ill, if you have been institutionalized for mental health problems, if you've been dishonorably discharged from a branch of the services, if you are an illegal immigrant, and there's some other criteria, then you cannot own a gun in our country, and I support that. The problem is that the federal and state employees who are in charge of inputting the data into the NICS system so we can determine who these people are not doing their job. And it's just that simple. Now, the bill, and of course the NICS system is run by the Department of Justice, specifically the FBI. This is what the bill would do. It basically, to federal bureaucrats who aren't doing their job, it says, pretty please with sugar on top, do your job. And it says if you don't do your job, we might not give you your bonus this year. Well, the question obviously is why they're getting a bonus anyway if they're not doing their job. To state bureaucrats that aren't doing their job, who aren't doing their job, it says, if you will do your job, we'll give you more money. There are grants that are given by the Department of Justice, and the bill says it reauthorizes those grants and says that we'll give you grants if you will do your job. I think that, I don't mean any disrespect, I think Senator Cornyn and Senator Murray and others have worked very hard on this bill, but I think it's a tribute to the power of human denial if they think this bill will work. State and federal employees already have an incentive to do their job. It's called their job. And those at the Justice Department, those in our state bureaucracies who aren't doing their job ought to be fired. That's part of the problem I have learned about this place in my first year here is nobody ever gets fired for not doing their job. They get offered more money. The tragedy in Sutherland Heights in Texas happened in part because someone in the Air Force did not upload this idiot's information into the national database. We heard testimony from a representative of the Air Force in committee, I don't know, 2 months ago. We were told they were investigating. As best I can tell, they're still investigating. And I doubt that the person responsible for uploading that data, who did not upload that data, that might have prevented this tragedy, probably nothing will happen to him or her. And to me, unless we're serious, or until we're serious about implementing this law and starting to fire people and holding both high-level and lower-level bureaucrats to their job, then we're not going to make any progress. And with that, let me mention one other thing. I have signed off on a letter with Senator Lee and Senator Paul to Senator Cornyn, which basically asks that some changes be made to the bill to provide due process rights to those other than people who are convicted of a felony. Obviously, if you are convicted of a felony in an Article 3 court or a state court, you have been afforded due process. But there are others, for example, some of our veterans, some people who have been interdicted, who would automatically be assumed to be ineligible to own a gun, and then the burden would be on them to prove that they are entitled to own a gun. The suggestions that Senator Lee and Senator Paul and I make would say, look, everybody's entitled to due process, and they're entitled to due process before they're put on the list, not after. But I do expect that those amendments will be adopted. And while I support them and I think they'll make the bill better, I still am not going to vote for the bill for the reasons I explained. And I'll be glad to answer any questions. Yes.
Why do you think you're the only vote against it? Have you learned that just in the hot?
I'm not guaranteeing that result. That's just a sense I have. I don't know. I think when government fails, oftentimes the answer is more government. And I meant what I said earlier. I don't think we need more gun control. I think we need more idiot control. The idiots who are committing these tragedies, and frankly, the idiots who aren't doing their job in the state and federal bureaucracy. They're not uploading the information. And I want to say it again, I support the policy. I support the database. I think if you've been institutionalized for mental health problems, until you can prove that you're well, you shouldn't be able to own a gun. I think if you've committed a felony, you shouldn't own a gun. I think if you have committed domestic violence against a spouse, you shouldn't own a gun. I think if you've been dishonorably discharged from the military, you shouldn't own a gun. And I think most Americans agree with that. The law is settled. What we have here is an enforcement problem. And I don't think telling the federal bureaucracy, look, pretty please with sugar on top, do your job. And I don't think telling the state bureaucracy that if you'll do your job, we'll give you more taxpayer money. I don't think that's the answer. I think the answer is to hold people accountable, and if they're not doing their job, fire them. And if they say, well, we're protected, you can't fire me, the answer, the appropriate response, in my opinion, is you haven't done your job, you're fired. If you don't like it, get a lawyer. I'll get a lawyer and we'll litigate it, but you're still fired. And if you do that once or twice, people will start taking the database seriously. But I don't think they're going to take it seriously if you ask them pretty please with sugar on top, and I don't think they're going to take it seriously if you just say we'll give you more money if you do your job. If there are any governors in America who are not committed to the background check, they need to stand up and say so. If they are committed to it, then they need to make sure their states comply. And I don't just criticize our states, I criticize our Justice Department in that as well. And our Air Force. I'm still waiting for my answer on what's going to happen to the person or persons who did not upload the information about this idiot who killed 26 people in Sutherland Heights. Yes, ma'am.
So do you have a commitment from the majority about voting on the bill? Is it going
No, I don't. As you've heard me say before, I just work here. I don't know how they're going to do it. I just am going to vote no. And I wanted to explain why. Sure.
May I ask as well, some of your colleagues on the other side of the aisle have really been pushing for more research on gun violence through the National Institutes of Health. Is that something that you support?
I just would need more information about that. Okay. I mean, look, there's some people in this world who aren't sick, who aren't confused. It's not a case of where their dad or mom didn't love them enough. They're just bad people. And I don't know why that is. But I don't think we ought to, and never have believed, that we ought to punish law-abiding citizens because of the acts of a few. When a radical Islamic jihadist blows up a school and kills the kids in it, we are told not to judge the acts of all Muslims or all Muslims by the acts of a few, and I agree with that. Why doesn't the same rule apply to the 90 million gun owners in America? We do have some idiots who, for whatever reason, use guns to kill other people. And I don't know why bad things happen to good people. If I make it to heaven, I'm going to ask that question. But they do. But I don't think we ought to punish all the lawful gun owners in America for the acts of a few idiots. And I think we have a law in place. It's called the NIC system, the National Database, to try to stop a lot of this. The problem is state and federal employees, both in the top tier and the middle and the lower tier, are not uploading the information. And the issue is, what do we do about it? As I said before, do we say, pretty please with sugar on top, we might take away your bonus? Or do we say, if you'll do your job, we'll give you more money? Or do we say, you haven't done your job, you're fired?
Thank you, Senator.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think this lady, I don't know her, but she's cutting me off, so.
I'm so sorry, we're gonna do questions outside there. Questions.
Okay.
Thank you, sir.
You bet. Hi, ladies. I'm well.
Thank you. Good. Nice to see you. Good to see you. Happy New Year. We thought Senator Kennedy was here to sign up for our proposal.
What are you talking about?
We're talking about.
$25 billion for opioid funding.
Oh, really? I want to sit down and talk.
All right,
There
good.
we
See,
go.
this is the start of an agreement.
Okay, good.
Let's fire somebody.
Well, thank you all for being here and for your patience. There was a little confusion, I gather, about scheduling today. I'm pleased to be here with my colleague from New Hampshire, Senator Hassan. But I'm not pleased to be talking about this topic. People are dying every day in New Hampshire and across the country, and the administration continues to pay lip service to the opioid crisis. We need action, not more empty promises. We need a federal response that matches the national public health emergency that we are facing. That's why Senator Hassan and I are proposing that leadership include $25 billion to address the opioid epidemic in any final budget package. Recently released data from the CDC confirms that New Hampshire has the third worst overdose death rate from substance abuse of any state in the country. Furthermore, the CDC report showed that in 2016, 42,000 people in America died of drug overdoses. And they also confirmed that this is a crisis that has spread so fiercely that it has reversed the positive trend toward longer life expectancy for the second year in a row, the first time that this has happened since the 1960s. So make no mistake, this is a national public health emergency, and we still don't see a robust federal response. In 2014, Congress provided $5.4 billion to address Ebola, and we hadn't lost one American. The current federal budget negotiations give us an opportunity to right this wrong. The additional $25 billion that Senator Hassan and I are proposing over 2 years would bridge the current gap between the domestic and defense budget numbers that negotiators are talking about. This parity between domestic and defense priorities is something Democrats have been adamant about during this budget debate. And by the way, it's something that we actually agreed to when we put in place the Budget Control Act of 2011, that there was going to be parity between the defense and the domestic side of the budget. So it's important that as we budget for the defense of this nation, we don't short shrift our domestic needs, particularly something of the magnitude of this opioid epidemic, which is a direct threat to every community in this nation. Make no mistake, $25 billion would help save lives because treatment saves lives. Our proposal for treatment funding is in line with what President Trump promised to do when he was campaigning in New Hampshire and throughout his campaign, and it's what he's promised to do since becoming president. Provide much-needed federal assistance for both treatment, prevention, law enforcement to help end this epidemic. This is a proposal that can gain bipartisan support because, as we have seen in the past, addressing the opioid epidemic is not a partisan issue. Talk to people in those states that are hardest hit, in West Virginia, in Ohio, in Maine, in New Hampshire. Everyone knows someone who has been hit by this epidemic, and they tell stories of broken families, of lives cut short, of devastated communities. This is a place where we can come together, Democrats and Republicans. We've done it before. We've showed that it is a funding solution that can help resolve our budget crisis. I urge our leaders to act. Senator Hassan.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Senator Shaheen, and thank you all for being here today. As Senator Shaheen said, New Hampshire and states across the country are grappling with the challenges of a truly devastating heroin, fentanyl, and opioid crisis. And we are seeing tens of thousands of Americans being lost to drug overdose deaths. The spread of synthetic opioids like fentanyl is making the crisis worse, killing people faster with much smaller amounts of drugs. And in both of the last 2 years, American life expectancy has decreased, in large part because of the opioid crisis. It's a crisis that doesn't discriminate. It affects people in every community and from all walks of life. It's something I hear about everywhere I go in New Hampshire and actually across the country. And I don't just hear about it from families where a loved one is struggling with addiction or a family who has lost a loved one to an overdose. I hear about it from employers. It's taking a massive toll on our workforce, and as the White House's own economic advisor acknowledges, on our economy. When I talk to those on the front lines in responding to this crisis in New Hampshire, I consistently hear that they need more resources to support this fight. They're doing so many creative things at the grassroots level, whether it's firefighters in our Safe Stations programs, or whether it's police departments assigning a police officer to be the point person on this crisis. They need the resources to do their jobs and to save lives. So Congress has to come together and put partisan politics aside to get this done. Negotiations on a long-term spending bill provide an important opportunity to address the urgent need to increase federal funding and make investments in key programs to combat substance use disorders. In New Hampshire and in states across the nation, families and communities are hoping and calling for a budget agreement to include a significant increase in funding to address this epidemic. Senate Democrats are fighting for a budget agreement that includes an additional $25 billion to combat the crisis. It would support treatment, recovery, prevention, and law enforcement efforts. I'll push to ensure that the hardest hit states like New Hampshire are accounted for with the appropriate amount of funding. It's going to take, by the way, a far greater federal investment to help support those on the front lines and to turn the tide of this epidemic. But providing an additional $25 billion now is an important first step that we really must take. The purpose of this funding bill is to ensure the safety, security, health, and well-being of our citizens and our country. The opioid crisis is the greatest public health crisis facing our country, something that members of both parties just acknowledged in a Help Committee hearing I left just a few minutes ago. We can't afford inaction. We need to get more resources to those on the front lines of this crisis and to those who are struggling to get the treatment they need. We need to save lives. Thank you.
Thank you. We'd be happy to answer questions. Yes.
A lot more money than you guys had put forward in the 21st Century Cures Act 2 years ago now, for the same period of time. Why do you think so much more money is needed on this right now?
Well, because we haven't seen the results that we were looking for. The fact is, when the Republicans put forward their last health care proposal, it included $45 billion to address the opioid epidemic. So we think this is a reasonable sum, and it's a sum that can help us as we're trying to resolve the budget, the disparities between the defense and the domestic side of the budget and the budget crisis that we're facing.
This is also a number that a member of the President's Commission on this epidemic put forward as an initial and important amount of money. One of the things that we just heard about in our Help Committee was the need to provide infrastructure for the grassroots and state level programs to combat this crisis, and the understanding that this is a long-term crisis. It took decades for us to get to this point. Experts tell us it's going to take years for us to truly turn the tide and beat this epidemic. That requires investment in ongoing infrastructure and building that infrastructure out. So we knew that the first $1 billion was a very important amount, but that it wasn't going to begin to really provide the kind of infrastructure that we need over the next multiple years to combat this crisis.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Senator. Lisa from the PBS NewsHour. I had a question going the other direction, which was about the $45 billion. And just months ago, there was so much pressure, so much talk about a major funding initiative. But yet, we see just you two senators here talking about this. Obviously, there are many issues going on right now. But can you talk about, has there been a change in the conversation at the Capitol, the pressure from the outside? What's happening? Obviously, we've seen some reports that opioid deaths are down, but really not by that much. What's happened with this issue that it's not the headline that it was?
Well, I think there are a lot of other headlines these days, but make no mistake, it remains the issue that it has been. And one of the important things to remember is that the funding is really critical, but what's also critical is maintaining the Affordable Care Act and the access to Medicaid expansion and health care that's available through the ACA. So when we were having the debate about the $45 billion, it was because they were talking about rolling back the Affordable Care Act. So as Senator Hassan says, this is a down payment, but we think it's an important start, and it's one, again, that can help us get where we need to go in terms of resolving the budget crisis.
And Senator Shaheen and I joined with senators from other parties on a letter that didn't specify a number, but showed bipartisan support for including more funding to combat this crisis in this end-of-year funding agreement. I will tell you that it has not moved off the radar screen of the people of our state. It is the #1 priority for every single Granite Stater who I talk to. It is devastating families and communities. It cost our economy in, I think it was 2014, about New Hampshire's economy, $2.5 billion. It's costing the national economy, according to the White House, about $500 million a year. Sorry, billion.
Million.
Yeah.
Yes.
Kimberly Leonard from the Washington Examiner. Do you have support from other Democrats for this specific funding amount?
We're building that as we speak, so.
Is this the first formal ask that's been out there in terms of
Well, there have been behind-the-scenes negotiations as well.
Yeah.
Can you speak when you're talking about the funding bill, you're talking about the budget cap bill,
Yes.
the long-term bill, not whatever, if there's a CR or whatever they do.
Right.
Yes, hopefully it will not just be a CR.
Yeah, hopefully it will not just be a CR.
Yes, you had a question.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry if I missed it, but how much have you reached out to the White House and got the Trump's backing on something like this?
I have not talked to the White House,
And neither have I.
so, well, thank you all. very
Thank you.
much.